The following footage may be upsetting to some viewers. Viewer discretion is advised. Did you know that 63% of Brits hate Margaret Thatcher and only 22% of Brits actually liked her? But why do so many people hate her? In this video, we will take a look back at the life of Britain's most hated Prime Minister and see how she got to where she is today. Before we start, make sure to like this video if you enjoy learning about some of the most hated people on Earth. In the beginning of our video, we will begin with some dramatic music playing in the background and then show some black and white photos of Margaret Thatcher throughout her life. We will then pan over to an old TV or computer screen showing footage of Margaret Thatcher giving a speech. As this plays, we will pan down to a newspaper clipping of one of her major policies or speeches. The newspaper clipping will then rip apart to reveal more information about that policy or speech. If there is any video footage of the speech itself, we can play it here. Otherwise, we can just show text on the screen to tell you what she said. Then we will show images of Margaret Thatcher working as a lawyer. This will lead us into her early political career, which we will display on the screen with the year. Then we will show footage of the Parliament building as we narrate that she was elected as an MP in 1959. To add some drama, we can have this scene flash rapidly as we narrate quickly. We can then show some images of her family life to break up the monotony of the video before returning to footage of her political career. As she rose through the ranks of the Conservative Party, we can show images of her as a cabinet member under Edward Heath, and then as leader of the opposition, under James Callaghan. Once again, we will show the year next to her face to help the viewer keep track of time. After this, we will show a crowd of people protesting outside of Parliament. As they chant and hold signs, we will tell the audience that the country was in a state of unrest. There were 3-day strikes going on across the country, and inflation had reached double digits. After showing more protest footage, we will show some newspaper clippings detailing the strikes and inflation. Then we will show a headline saying Thatcher elected with the year 1979 flashing on the screen. We will then show footage of Margaret Thatcher entering 10 Downing Street for the first time as Prime Minister. At this point in the video, we can show a picture of the cabinet members who served under her, along with their names. Now that Thatcher was in power, she set about implementing her major policies. For example, she wanted to sell off some of the government's holdings, which would become known as privatization. She also wanted to take on the powerful unions and introduce a new economic strategy. To show these policies being introduced, we can show images of documents being signed or shown with red ink covering them to symbolize that blood will be spilled in order to implement these policies. Thatcher's government soon clashed with the unions, and in 1981, a group of civil servants were asked to draw up plans for the eventual closure of the coal industry. It was clear that Thatcher would be remembered for her handling of the unions. So let's dive into it. In 1983, a strike started in the print and publishing industries. The print and publishing strike ended after 4 days when the workers accepted a 7% pay increase. However, the strike caused other problems for the government and made them realize that they needed to defeat the unions once and for all. On top of the ongoing battle with the unions, the country was spiraling into recession. Unemployment and interest rates were rising, and inflation had reached a staggering 14%. People were getting fed up with the high taxes and poor economy. Many took to the streets to protest against Thatcher. Some of the protesters even broke away from the main group to storm a local pub. Then we will show some footage of the actual storm and protest. Eventually, the police arrived and moved the protesters out of the pub, but not before several of the windows had been smashed and the contents of the pub had been destroyed. In 1984, the National Union of Mine Workers declared a strike over the proposal to pit closures. The miners went on strike for a year until their eventual defeat. During the strike, pickets protested outside of the local newspaper offices, but they were turned away, so they decided to march to another local newspaper office. However, after they had marched for miles, the police stopped them and refused to let them continue. The police then began beating the protesters and making arrests. Soon the police had surrounded the protesters and were preventing them from moving forward. The protesters responded by throwing stones and bottles at the police, which only enraged the officers further. Soon the streets were filled with flying objects, and the situation began to spin out of control. Eventually, the police were able to restore order, and the protesters were sent home. At this point in the video, we can show some text that tells you some facts about the strike, such as the number of people on strike and how long it lasted. We can also show the name and date of the strike. During the miners' strike, there were several violent clashes between the police and protesters. The worst of these clashes occurred in the town of Orgriv, where hundreds of protesters gathered. The police arrived and attempted to break up the gathering, but this led to violent clashes. Soon the police were overwhelmed and called for backup. Eventually, 6,000 police officers were needed to restore order. During the strike, the government arrested several union leaders on charges of stirring up riots. One of the most prominent figures arrested was Arthur Scargill, who was the leader of the National Union of Mine Workers. The arrests led to further unrest as the miners felt that the government was trying to stifle dissent. The miners' strike was eventually won by the government and the pits were closed down. However, the victory was a Pyrrhic one, as the strike had taken its toll on the country. The strike had also damaged Thatcher's reputation as a strong leader, and she was beginning to be seen as a symbol of oppression. Throughout all of this, we'll try to keep the energy of the video high by showing quick clips of different events instead of lingering on one event for too long. In 1986, the government announced plans to introduce the poll tax, which was a tax on all adults. The announcement of the new tax led to widespread protests as people felt that it was unfair. On March 31, 1990, the poll tax was introduced and people were outraged. They felt that it was a betrayal by Thatcher, and they took to the streets to protest. We will show footage of the protest and the violence that ensued. The protest turned into a riot, and people began looting shops and setting fire to buildings. Soon the streets were filled with smoke and the sound of breaking glass. Eventually, the police were able to restore order, but not before several businesses had been destroyed. When Thatcher resigned in 1990, she was seen as a divisive figure. Her supporters saw her as a strong leader who had helped to restore Britain's economy. Her critics saw her as a tyrant who had crushed the unions and brought the country to its knees. But what do you think of Thatcher? Let us know in the comments below. So then we will show a split screen with two different opinions on Thatcher. On the left side of the screen, we will show a supporter holding a sign that says Thatcher, Prime Minister of the Year. On the right side of the screen, we will show a critic holding a sign that says Thatcher. Underneath both of the signs, we will show the years in which they were held up. Finally, we will end the video with a text overlay that reads, "Loved by some, hated by many." Yes. The legacy of the Iron Lady lives on. And that's all for this video. Thanks for watching, and I hope you learned something new. If you enjoyed this video, then make sure to hit the subscribe button, because we have lots more interesting content coming up.